Hi, I'm Dr. Hackey Reitman. Welcome to another episode of Exploring Different Brains. And today we're so lucky to have coming to us. We're in Florida and up there in the freezing Yukon, not Yukon, but UConn, University of Connecticut, from their terrific Include program for neurodiversity, Dr. Arash Zaghi and Dr. Marisa Karisoku.
My students always call me Dr. C, so there you
Dr.
go.
C. Now, why don't you guys introduce yourselves properly? You go first, Marissa.
Thank you, Heike. So I'm so happy to meet and talk with you today. So I'm Marisa Crisoko, and I am a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Connecticut, also the head of the department, and I am very fortunate to lead this initiative of the department on neurodiversity.
Okay, Arash, you're up.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. It is great to be with you, Heike, today. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. Marisa essentially is my boss and a mentor. And I started this research actually a few years back. And here we are today after many projects that we did.
First, let me say that I love the Include program that you have. And I love the fact that you've created, I love in your wording, you're creating an ecosystem for everything. And then also that you're in the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental as well. So it's so good to be combining the sustainability with the engineering, with all of our different brains, our neurodiversity. Tell us, if you can, how you guys started this program.
So I think that Arash has to answer this question because he's really, the pioneer and the one who initiated all activities related to neurodiversity in the department.
Sure, Marisa. So Heck, it all started with a personal experience and my personal diagnosis actually with ADHD about 6-7 years ago. So I was going from a doctor to another one to be able to figure what's wrong with me, that I have so much anxiety and it's so difficult for me that I manage my daily tasks. I think I was in my second year as an assistant professor. And in academia, the pressure is very high on junior faculty. It remains high, but junior faculty, they don't know how to juggle many balls. And I was extremely fortunate that the last doctor that I met asked me after 5 minutes of talking and introduction, oh, have you been diagnosed with ADHD? And it was never on my radar. I always knew that I have a slightly different brain, or maybe drastically different brain, because even going many years back in my primary school, I had problems with some of subjects that they were super easy for other kids, but I had absolutely no problem with challenging like math or physics classes. And so I knew that, and but I never wondered if it can be ADHD because I was able to cope with that. But at that point in my life and career, essentially my coping strategies had failed, and I wasn't able to actually to manage my daily responsibilities without extreme anxiety. So I did a test. It was a self-report, and I think that was the highest score I got in a test ever. So, and she said, like, how could this be? I mean, that you score so high in this, and then have never sought any formal diagnosis. That was a big question, but I immediately asked, okay, what should I do now? I mean, like, this was a new revelation to me. I mean, that was a new identity, and as opposed to immediately writing a prescription for me, she suggested that I educate myself about this. I don't know if she did that particularly because she knew I'm in academia, I'm into kind of learning about fundamentals of things and like more technical literature, or she suggests that to all the patients. So anyways, I mean, like she suggested like a few books and articles, and they were mainly self-help books. But as I was reading, I again, my ADHD distracted me to more technical, scientific articles, mainly discussing the association of, for example, like risk-taking, divergent thinking, novelty seeking, those traits with ADHD, because like those self-help books, mainly they focus on the challenges. I mean, like problems and issues that that we face in academia or in the work environment. And I mean, 100% of the focus is on that. Maybe they mention here and there that, oh, they are like creative people sometimes. I mean, but that's not their focus. And that's how they sell their books. So, and I started like reading some technical article, and like one paper I remember that I found it like late at night, and it kept me up by 3 a.m. until I finished it. And it was a very interesting work that was done in Norway and England. And they had done simulations of hypothetical societies with like population, and they had introduced like changes. It was all computational work. They had introduced some changes to their kind of food resource, and then they had like homogeneous societies and societies on with a percentage of unexpected people with traits similar to what we see, for example, in those with ADHD, risk takers, those that they can think outside the box. And they had shown with those simulations that like those societies that they are homogeneous and everyone thinks the same way. Likewise, I mean, like they diminish after a few months of introducing that kind of like food shortage. And there is a kind of sweet spot for what percentage of, and then they had done the other like end of the spectrum analysis on the under, that everyone is a risk taker, everyone is unexpected, and those societies also diminish. And they had shown that like 7 to 15% of population, if they have these traits, it helps the survival because they can risk, they can explore new things, unexpected findings, and they can pass along this knowledge. And
So the light went on in your brain to work from the positive, that this is like a superpower you might have, and that if we focus on the positives, we can move forward together much better. And then, and Marisa, so Arash was self-discovering his own ADHD and discovering tools and how to go about it, and wanted to share this with others. What about your journey?
Well, while all this was happening, I was focused on doing my own research, and then what happened was that, like you said, Arash, took this revelation and turned it into positive, not only for himself but for others as well, and so he started, with research helping and projects helping neurodiverse students in the department, essentially, like a year or two after his own self-discovery. And so by 2018 or 19, when I became department head, we had kind of like approximately 3 or 4 years, I want to say, of exposure of the department, progressive exposure, to these new ideas, new to us, that neurodiversity is in engineering and in general for the world is a positive. And so when I became department head and I asked Arash to be associate head, we were talking about ways that we wanted to improve education and we wanted to improve, inclusivity in the department as a whole. So that was kind of like my mission and my idea for what I want, for an engineering school. And Arash kind of like introduced the neurodiversity lens into this idea of inclusivity. And I immediately saw that, this is a lens that not many people have taken in our world, and that really has a lot of promise for the future and a lot of promise both for education, but also for innovation in general. And so then, we worked together to write a proposal to the National Science Foundation to take the work that he started, to the next level by embracing it, in the entire department and hopefully beyond that as well.
Now, have you gotten pushback or has this been embraced?
It has been completely embraced. I'm actually, it's very interesting because from the beginning, the culture shift and how that may happen was, a question mark that we had. And, we kind of like expected that, it may not be easy to accomplish, but there has been a tremendous response. And I think there are a couple of different factors. One factor is that I think society as a whole is kind of like moving that way, like Black Lives Matters and Me Too, and a lot of different societal forces are pushing towards inclusivity. And so, equity and diversity, of like people should also extend to brain differences. I think people just saw that. The other part is that, there are a lot of people who are neurodiverse and who don't necessarily say so. Right. And so a lot of people, I think, identify with this. We have students, parents, colleagues, all kinds of people come and say, oh my gosh, I was waiting for something like this. So I have been really overwhelmed by the positive response.
Well, that's just great. It's very encouraging to hear that. You use the word traits, which is something that's really coming into focus lately in my own brain. I spoke with Tim Goldstein of timgoldstein.com, and he introduced me to a term I think he started using with his interns, neurodistinct. People have neurodistinct traits, as opposed to looking for the whole diagnosis. Everyone has so much in common, a little bit more of an ADHD type trait, a little bit, but we're finding out more, for instance, in ADHD, that it's not so much the focus problem, it's the executive function. I'm recently self-diagnosing myself with adult ADHD because I'm always all over the place. But there is such overlap between, say, ADHD traits and Asperger's and autistic traits and anxiety traits, and they all overlap because you can't have, for instance, autism and not have some anxiety and depression associated with it. So at differentbrains.org, we have the mental health issues right there alongside with the developmental differences, right there with the neurological differences such as epilepsy, Parkinson's, and so forth, because they all coalesce. So what you've done there at UConn with the Include program is, how has the response been with enrollment and so forth for your program?
I think it's kind of like too early to say, right, Arash, about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. It's at its infancy. So so far we've been very successful in terms of like raising awareness, making noise, culture shift, and making people aware of this. And Marissa is working really hard to institutionalize it within the department and beyond. But I think Marissa can speak to that, but I think it takes a few years to see the impact of that on enrollment.
Well, it's what I've found myself, that you know, it's like, for instance, our terrific neurodivergent interns, you know, we have 6 of them applying to medical school. And some of them wanted to stay in the closet, so to speak, with their neurodiversities. And I said, well, look, I commuted for 30 years to Boston University. I was an assistant professor there teaching anatomy and orthopedics. Now I give lectures in neurodiversity up there. But I was an orthopedic surgeon by trade. But I said, you know, when I was, for a small period of time, I was on the admissions committee, and you have to do something that distinguishes yourself of being different. And I said, if it was me, I would embrace it. And I'll kind of a light went on, and I said, make it part of your resume, be proud of it. So one of them is writing a book on ADHD. And if you go on our website, you see the Power Tools webisode series with Ali Idris, who's going to be a great physician someday, and Brooke Schnittman, who's an expert in ADHD. We have another with severe OCD, and now she's writing a book about that, you know, and then to give each other tools. What tools did you use to become successful now that you have a master's degree or you're in college? And I find that getting people to come out of the closet, so to speak, takes a little bit of showing it it's in their best interest to do that. When you talk about someone like Sean Smith, who introduced us to you with Don't Diss My Abilities, who's to me he's one of the pioneers. He's going out there and pushing it.
It's fantastic.
He really is. How did you guys meet Sean?
So I have a colleague, Jamie Barr, who works for Langan Engineering, and Jamie and I have been working together on another initiative, the Brownfields Initiative, you know, for years. And somehow I mentioned this to him as part of one of our meetings, and he introduced me to Sean. You know, said, you know, I have a friend Sean who's fantastic. You know, you should talk to him. So I talked to him, and so, you know, yeah, the next is history. He was included in the proposal, and then, you know, we've been working together ever since.
Can I say something about what you mentioned, because it was like right to the point. You mentioned about like these traits, and for example, like we have ADHD and we have like anxiety, depression, and that is very true. That's what we are seeing. The prevalence of, for example, anxiety and depression is like way higher than like normal people. But I want to make a case here that it's not supposed to be like that. It wasn't like that in like ancient societies, because they had the luxury of doing things their own way, adventure seeking, you know, risk taking. They were hunter, they were warrior. I mean, like there was nothing in that time to bore you, or, you know, like you make you kind of like frustrated with life. So, and we gradually, after we started farming and all of those things, and then I think, I mean, like the knockout, actually, I would say, punch was our over standardized education system. For
one size fits all.
One size fits all. I mean, look at the standard test. It is standardized how you perform if you're good. Standardized tests, they measure standard brains or capabilities of standard brains. So they don't do anything else other than that. So, and it's fine if we say, okay, this education system, you know, like for people to know, it is only designed for this segment of the society. So others, they find their own way. And, you know, like look at tech people. I mean, like, those giants and innovators in tech industry, they many of them are dropouts. They don't care about education. I mean,
and the one size fits all that permeates our employment system, our educational system, everything about us is, well, like my daughter taught me, every brain is like a snowflake and no two are alike. And once we get that head in there, then everything gets easy. Once you look at an individual like that and say, gee, your eyesight's not so good. Maybe I'm not going to write on the blackboard, or you can't hear. Maybe I won't have you listen to tapes. And it can be that simple, but we seem to make it much more difficult. Now, you guys are in civil engineering, and tell me your thoughts on the subject of universal design for accessibility. Marissa, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay. Well, we think that universal design is a great foundation on which to start. So universal design is kind of like the minimum on which our project wanted to build. So you start from the idea that, yes, you're going to have multiple modes of representation, you're going to have captions, and all these things. But that is something that is, we think we can go beyond that and go do better than that, in the sense that we don't want to focus on accessibility. We don't want to focus on what you cannot do and remedy that, but we want to focus on people's strengths and students' abilities instead of, instead of the remedy. So while we're using universal design as a tool, we don't think that that alone is going to make the difference in terms of the educational system.
Where can people learn more about the Include program?
Mercedes, the website I would suggest, or
yes, right now it is the website. I mean, it's probably, I guess it doesn't have a whole lot of information on this right now, because we're actually building a new website that's going to be called neurodiversity.uconn.edu. That's going to be, a more general resource. We have put more effort into, our activities rather than advertising the program itself,
Oh,
I would say.
Can they email you? Can they, how would people, if people have an interest in your Include program at UConn, how can they contact you and learn more?
Oh, so the information is on the website. My contact information and the contact information of the program manager, Connie Siharat, is also there. So we have put more effort so far into increasing awareness and people learning about the project within the university. Through different avenues. Our next step is we are conducting a high school outreach program within the state. So we're going to be talking, and creating some webinars for, I think, something like 800 high schools or something like that within the state of Connecticut. So our efforts have mostly been local, because we are the flagship university of the state of Connecticut. So 75% of our students are actually from the state. But if people outside from the state, want to learn about it, yes, I guess the website is the best place to find us. And we will be populating more with videos and webinars and things like that as we're creating content.
Is there anything we have not covered today that you would like to cover?
I think, that one message that I would like to get, to like young people out there is that, it's important to advocate for yourself. It's important to believe in your own abilities and your own strengths, and to find your place in the world. And engineering, and STEM may not always, feel welcoming, but we believe that all neurodiverse people have not just a place in engineering and STEM, but they are critical for the future of it. And so, we'd really like to, for young people to see themselves as future creators and join our ranks.
Arash, what would you say?
and if I may use your platform actually to So what I hope very soon, and very soon is like in a year or two, we start realizing that terminology matters, and the words that we use to describe a condition, it doesn't need to come from like medical field. I mean, we call something deficit, disability, things like, and that medical field needs to be as specific as possible, and things are set in a way and it doesn't matter there are names. I mean, like they're not ashamed of naming things different names. I mean, like that's medical field. Education is not, it doesn't need to be like that. In education, we don't need to call a student disabled because they are not. I don't consider myself disabled. I'm different. In this context, yes, I'm very different. I have challenges, but I'm not disabled. Disabled, let's think about the definition. Let's think about the meaning of that. It means that I'm incapable. I cannot do things. So terminology matters, and we have to be very careful how we describe these kids, because using that terminology in education leads to stigmatization of these kids. And that leads to a lot of other problems because they see this pressure and they don't feel comfortable to discuss this with others, and they internalize this kind of pain, their own experience. If it was something that we could just openly discuss and say like how shared these experiences are. And I have students, I have worked with groups that we have they have ADHD, and we talk about our experiences. It's just like it's funny, and when it's like how similar those are. So it should be like that. And when you discuss, when you laugh it out, it's not going to be something that you blame yourself for. It doesn't corrode your confidence essentially. So I think that's very important that we start using the right terminology in education and in general.
Well, it's been a pleasure to have you both here. Thank you so much, Arash and Marissa from the University of Connecticut Include program. Keep up the great work you both do for those of us whose brains are a bit different. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, Haki. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Haki. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Exploring Different Brains is a production of Different Brains. Visit us at differentbrains.org.